The sun was sinking low over Maple Avenue, painting the quiet street in hues of gold and orange. It was a picture of perfect tranquility, manicured lawns, white picket fences, the gentle, slow rhythm of a small neighborhood winding down for the day. But sometimes, the most peaceful scenes hide the deepest pain. On one worn-out porch, a small boy stood, clutching a teddy bear so tightly his knuckles were white. Tears carved clean streaks down his dusty cheeks, and his small voice trembled as he whispered to no one in particular. "He hurt my grandma." The little boy's name was Ethan. He was only 6 years old. Dust and grime clung to his little blue hoodie from where he had stumbled on the steps, desperate to get away. Beside him, his grandmother Clara sat on an old porch swing. Her dress was torn at the shoulder, and her hand trembled as she tried, with all her might, to force a reassuring smile for him. Framed in the doorway behind them stood a man. His face was a mask of frustration, his stance unsteady, and his voice, which had echoed through the house just moments before, was sharp with anger. He wasn't family, not by blood. He was just someone who had offered to help Clara after her husband passed away. But that promised help had slowly, cruelly, twisted into control, then into shouting, and finally into fear. Ethan couldn't stay inside. He ran out onto the porch, holding the one thing that felt safe. The worn, soft bear his grandmother had lovingly stitched for him. He didn't know where to go or what to do. He only knew that someone, somewhere, had to help them. And then came a sound. It started as a low rumble, a distant hum that grew steadily louder, deeper, and more powerful. It was the sound of engines. 6 gleaming motorcycles turned the corner onto Maple Avenue, their chrome catching the last rays of the setting sun. They pulled up in a perfect line, right in front of the little house. The man leading them was tall and broad-shouldered, with silver streaks running through his dark beard. Stitched proudly on the back of his leather vest were 2 words, the Guardian's MC. It was a name they had earned not through fighting, but through protecting. His name was Rafe. He cut his engine, the sudden silence amplifying the tension on the street. He swung his leg over his bike and walked toward the porch, his heavy boots making no sound on the grass. He knelt down slowly, so he was eye level with the terrified little boy. "Hey, buddy," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "What's wrong?" Ethan couldn't find the words. He just lifted a trembling finger and pointed, past the porch swing, toward his grandmother, toward the man still lingering in the doorway. Rafe's jaw tightened. He recognized that look of silent pain. He'd seen it before, a long time ago, and he had sworn to himself back then that he would never, ever walk away from it again. He rose to his full height, a silent, imposing figure. Behind him, his riders dismounted and stood by their bikes. They weren't posturing, they weren't looking for a fight. They simply stood there, a quiet, unshakable wall of calm strength. All along Maple Avenue, the neighborhood was watching. Curtains twitched in windows. Hearts beat a little faster. The man in the doorway finally spoke, his voice laced with a weak attempt at bravado. "This isn't your business." Rafe took a single step forward. His voice was low, but it carried with absolute clarity. "It became my business," he said, his eyes never leaving the man's, "the moment I heard a child cry for help." The man's angry facade crumbled. His shoulders slumped. His gaze dropped to the floorboards. The anger evaporated, leaving only a hollow shell of shame. Without another word, he turned, walked back inside the house, and a moment later, he was gone, leaving out the back. Silence fell over the street once more. But this time, it was a true, peaceful silence. Rafe turned back to Clara and knelt beside her chair. "You didn't have to do that," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Rafe just shook his head softly. "No one," he said, looking from her to Ethan, "should ever have to feel unsafe. Not you, not him." The other riders moved in, not with menace, but with care. One brought a bottle of water. Another produced a small first aid kit from his saddlebag. They called for an ambulance, just to be safe, and they waited. While they waited, these big, tough men that society so often judges sat quietly on the porch steps, showing more genuine care and compassion than words ever could. And for the first time that day, a small smile touched Ethan's lips. It was just a flicker, but it was enough. It reached right into Rafe's heart. When the paramedics arrived and began to gently help Clara inside, Ethan wrapped his small arms around Rafe's leg and hugged it tight. "Thank you," he whispered up at the giant of a man. Rafe just nodded, his throat suddenly too thick with emotion to speak. Before getting back on his bike, he took one last look at the porch, at the child, the grandmother, and the home that was now, finally, on the path to healing. Sometimes, he thought, the strongest kindness really does come from the people the world least expects it from. He revved his engine once, not a sound of intimidation, but a sound of promise. A promise that help is always there. And then, he and the Guardians rode away, their silhouettes disappearing into the golden sky. If this story touched your heart, please show your support by hitting that like button, leaving a comment, and subscribing to Kindness Corner, the place where courage and compassion always meet. And we want to hear from you. What would you do if you heard a child call for help? Let us know in the comments below, because one single act of kindness can change everything. Thank you for watching.